Hello everyone, I'm back here with the second part of the lesson, the British Raj. This is a social studies lesson for 5th standard. The name of the lesson is the British Raj. We finished the first part in the last class and let's just go to a recap. Now there we had seen that the British came out as the superpower and defeated all others, that is the Portuguese, the Dutch and the French who had come to India and thought of making this their colony. Well, the British established their power and then they happened to try to put down Siraj-ud-Dawla, the ruler of Bengal. There was a battle because Siraj-ud-Dawla did not like the British setting up forts and bringing their army to settle down in Bengal. There was a battle that is known as the Battle of Plassey, but unfortunately Siraj-ud-Dawla lost the war. It was because Mir Jafar, one of his trusted generals, supported the British, left his side and went over to the side of the British. Now let's go on to the second part of the lesson where we'll come across the doctrine of lapse, the Battle of Buxar, Bahadur Shah Zafar and the First War of Independence. These are the main topics that will be covered in the second part of the lesson. So page 268, the last paragraph. This battle in 1757 is known as the Battle of Plassey. This victory made the British very powerful in Bengal. Bengal was a very fertile and rich territory. The British succeeded in exploiting the farmers for their own benefit. They forced farmers to work as cheap labor and grow cash crops such as cotton and indigo. So the British gained supremacy in Bengal after defeating Siraj-ud-Dawla, and then it was purely a very difficult life for the Indians there. They made the Indians laborers, in fact very laborers who worked at very cheap rates. And of course, cotton and indigo were grown as cash crops and later on exported to other countries, including Britain. The British made the farmers sell their raw materials at a low price. All this made the Indian farmers very poor, but the British were able to make a great deal of profit. So the Indian farmers who grew cotton and indigo, they were forced to sell the raw material at a very low price. And in this deal, the British were the ones who made the profit. The British won the Battle of Buxar in 1764. So after the Battle of Plassey comes the Battle of Buxar in 1764. After this battle, they started extending their territories by forcing Indian rulers to surrender their kingdoms through various policies. So slowly they began stretching their arms far and wide and started extending their empire in India using different types of policies against different Indian rulers. According to one such policy, the British declared that a state would be taken over by the British if the ruler of that state died without a natural born heir. This was called the doctrine of lapse. The doctrine of lapse. Through this policy, the British were able to occupy Jhansi, Nagpur and other places. Now let me tell you about the doctrine of lapse. Now this was a new policy adopted by the British to take over some areas that were under the Indian rulers. Now in this doctrine of lapse, the British formulated that if an Indian king dies without a natural born heir, that means if he does not have his own son born from him or a own daughter born from him, then automatically the kingdom will be taken over by the British. And through this policy, what happened is the kingdoms of Jhansi, Nagpur and some other places fell into the hands of the British. That is why it is named the doctrine of lapse, because the lapse came, this kingdom came into the hands of the British because of the lapse. And what was the lapse? There was no natural heir to succeed to the kingship. Next paragraph. By 1857, the British were the masters of almost the whole of India. Every section among the Indians was unhappy with British rule. The Indian rulers who had lost their kingdoms were ready to fight the British. It was in these circumstances that the revolt of 1857 broke out. Now, the British occupied almost all the states in India and Indians were unhappy under British rule. The people wanted to revolt, and slowly they started gathering courage and strength and unity, and that is how the revolt of 1857 broke out. The revolt started among Indian soldiers at Meerut on 10th May 1857. So the first revolt that started, it was among the Indian soldiers in Meerut on 10th May 1857. The soldiers in Meerut heard that the cartridges used in rifles were greased with fat from cows and pigs. This offended the religious sentiments of both Hindus and Muslims. They refused to use these cartridges and rose against the British. Now, the issue that made these soldiers rise against the British was that they found out the cartridges. Now, cartridges are, the olden age guns, you can say, or rifles. They were greased, or that means rubbed with the fat taken from cows and pigs. Now, the Hindus were against using the fat taken from cows, and the Muslims were against using the fat taken from pigs. So this made both the communities get angry and disheartened, and that is how this Indian soldiers, they rose in revolt against the British. They refused to use these cartridges and rose against the British. So the Indian soldiers did not want to touch the cartridges that were rubbed with the greased with the fat from cows and pigs, and that is how they rose against the British, and the revolt of 1857 started. From Meerut, the soldiers moved to Delhi. At Delhi, the people got together and proclaimed Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, as their leader. So in Delhi, all these people, the soldiers, they got together and they proclaimed Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, as their leader. From Delhi, the revolt spread to other parts of India. Every area put up its own leader, such as Nana Sahib, Tantia Tope, Rani Lakshmi Bai, and Liaquat Ali. So this revolt, it started spreading to different parts of India from Delhi, and we had various leaders coming up in each area, like Tantia Tope, Rani of Jhansi, and Nana Sahib. This revolt is known as the First War of Independence. So the First War of Independence was this revolt that was started by the soldiers in Meerut and later on spread to different parts of India. Despite the brave efforts of the Indian people, they were no match for the British, who had superior weapons. Now the Indians here had a lot of grit and courage, but they did not have a lot of ammunition with them, or they did not have a lot of weapons to help them fight and win the battle. And that was one reason they always failed when they headed with the British. They crushed the revolt and punished the people who joined the revolt. So the British, it was very easy for the British to punish these soldiers and kill the soldiers, and also they put down the soldiers and they won the revolt. Bahadur Shah Zafar was exiled to Burma, now called Myanmar. They caught hold of this leader, Bahadur Shah Zafar, and he was exiled or sent away, deported out of the country to Burma, which is now known as Myanmar. Next page. Immediately after the revolt, the British ended the rule of the East India Company. India was brought directly under the British government. A Governor General was appointed to rule over India on behalf of the Crown. The revolt failed, but it marked a new chapter in Indian history. Indians were inspired by the bravery of the leaders and the people who fought in the revolt. They were ready to organize themselves better and fight for their independence. Now, the First War of Independence, of course, was a shock for many Indians, because many Indians were killed, many of the Indian leaders were killed, and the British crushed the force and the spirit of the Indians. But the Indians did not lose heart. Now, this was a stepping stone for their success. Later on, they all gathered, all the Indians from various parts of India mustered up courage and bravery, and they resolved to fight against the British and make their country independent. Now, what happened after this revolt is the British withdrew the East India Company from India, and Britain brought a Governor General to rule India. There was one person, the Governor General, who was responsible as the head of the whole of India, and he was directly responsible to the Crown. So the East India Company was withdrawn by the British and replaced by the Governor General. But this does not dampen the spirits of the Indians who gathered together to fight for independence. So the next chapter will be, you will be reading about independence and the leaders who fought for independence of our country. With this, we come to the end of the lesson. Let's come to the exercises on page 271. A. Tick the correct answers. 1. Jahangir allowed factories to be opened at other places because he thought India would get more money through trade. 2. India was occupied by the British because the Indian rulers were not united. 3. The farmers were unhappy because they were becoming poorer due to British policies. 4. The revolt of 1857 failed because the British had better weapons to suppress the people. 5. The Battle of Plassey was important because Indians showed they could fight too. B. Match the following. 1. Battle of Buxar, 1764. 2. Siraj-ud-Daulah, Nawab of Bengal. 3. Battle of Plassey, 1757. 4. First War of Independence, 1857. The last one, Rani Lakshmi Bai, a leader in the 1857 revolt. Now let's go on to the questions on the next page, page 272. Answer the following questions. Number 1. Why was India famous all over the world? Well, India was famous because of its wealth and fine goods. India had a lot of forest wealth. And of course, the southern part of India, South India, was famous for its spices. So India was famous all over the world. 2. Who were the first Europeans to trade with India? The Portuguese were the first Europeans to trade with India. 3. Why did Siraj-ud-Daulah declare war against the British? Now, Siraj-ud-Daulah did not like the fortification and of the army and the British army coming and settling down in Bengal, and that is why he raised his voice and declared war on the British. Explain the doctrine of lapse. Now, the doctrine of lapse says that if in the case of death of an Indian ruler or an Indian king, if there is no natural born heir, that means no direct son or daughter to the throne, the kingdom would automatically go into the hands of the British. That is why it is called doctrine of lapse, because the throne without any natural born heir is getting lapsed. So it's passing over to the hands of the British. Next one, fifth one. List any two causes for the first war of independence. Now the two causes will be the farmers had to sell their goods at very cheap rates and the British made a huge deal of profit. And second, the Indian rulers were forced to surrender some of their kingdoms because of the different policies used by the British to catch hold of these rulers and their provinces. Sixth one, what was the result of 1857? Now the revolt of 1857 is that the East India Company came to an end and the British government, they appointed a Governor General to represent the crown, and the other part is, though the Indians failed in the revolt against the British, the Indians still had hopes that they could stand united and gather courage and strength and fight against the British rule in India. Life skills. Freedom is a gift to us by our great freedom fighters. What, according to you, is the meaning of freedom? Freedom is not that we do what we like when we have freedom. That is not freedom. Freedom is to use the rights of freedom, or we can do what we like in a very right manner at the right time in the right place. It is not because I have the freedom, I can do anything I want in my country. I can rob somebody, I can kill somebody. No. We are living in a country where we are free to act as per our will, but within the laws and regulations framed by the Constitution. Values for life. Name some leaders of the First War of Independence. Does anything about them inspire you? Give reasons. Now here the first leaders could be You have Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lala Lajpat Rai, Tantia Tope, Rani Jhansi. All these are leaders who fought for India's independence, and Rani of Jhansi died fighting on horseback. Though she was a lady, she fought the British very bravely, dying on horseback while fighting for her country. Next one, hordes. Which of these was not a cause for the first war of independence? It is appointment of a Governor General to rule over India. That was not a cause for the Indians to fight against the British. With this, I come to the end of the lesson. Your homework will be to do questions A, B and C in the notebook and send to the school WhatsApp number. Thank you.